Hello and welcome. I am Brian, the Unskilled Commander, and this is the first ever episode of the Unskilled Commander Possibilities. You gotta say it like that too, possibilities. What the point of this little series is supposed to be for picking, or not even picking, just thinking about obviously, possible commanders. Using what I have. So going through the cards I have in my 2-3 row card box, picking out legendary creatures that seem like they might be interesting, might be fun, especially creatures that you don't see other people play often, or maybe creatures that have skills or abilities that are outside of my comfort zone, things that I don't normally go into because I'm not good at it or I don't like it. And just thinking about it, brainstorming real quick. I'm hoping not to, this. I want to keep this like 10 minutes or less. So we're not gonna build decks by any means, and and these aren't guaranteed that I'm gonna make these in the decks. They're really just thought exercises on how would you build them. And the idea is that especially if we build this into a channel that people actually go to and watch, it can be an actual discussion at some point where it's like, here's these three commanders, here's how I would build them. What cards do you want? What would you put as your main theme for this commander? How would you run it? What cards would you put in them? That kind of thing. So it's not even supposed to be just for me, because if people end up watching and commenting and reading the comments, it might be a fun way for others to pick out new commanders that they want to do. So for today's episode, we've got 3 commanders lined up. Dalakos, Crafter of Wonders, Balamor, Battle Mage Captain, and Jadzi, Oracle of Arcavellos. Now, I don't know if these are really popular commanders, or if they're horrible commanders, or if they're just their commanders. But like I said, like I said, whenever I was looking through my stuff, these kind of caught my attention for various reasons. So let's start left to right. We've got Dalakos, Crafter of Wonders. He is a 3-drop, which is good. Over time, I've really tried to lean into commanders that cost around 3 mana or less to get out, because they're going to get blown up some reason. Either board wipe, targeted removal, bounce, something, so that you're going to have to recast it. And starting out low with a 1, 2, 3 mana drop means it's not that hard to get it back out at least one more time. A lot of the really good ones tend to be like, I guess I can't say that I don't know for sure, but from what I've seen, it seems like a lot of the good commanders are 5-drops, which then, of course, unless you ramp really well, it's hard to get them out early. And then second you do and they get blown up, well, great, now I only have 5 mana, so I can't cast it again. So 3-drop is really good. He's a 2/4, and he says tap, I'm assuming it's a he, but you tap, add 2 colorless mana. Spend it only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. And his static ability says equipped creatures you control have flying and haste. Now, for me, that sounds fun. It sounds like I would build this as a pure artifact deck, and I understand, of course you would. But I mean artifact creatures. Like, I wouldn't even really try and worry about colored creatures in terms of blue creatures or red creatures or whatever. I would focus on simply lots of, mana dork, artifact creatures, and like one of the overseers, I think, gives all other colorless or artifact creatures +1/+1. What the Foundry Inspector, makes artifacts cost 1 less, or artifact creatures cost 1 less, something like that. So those kind of things, similar in vein kind of to the mirror deck I have had. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it, type of thing, but something like that. So obviously I would put important blue and red creatures in there that gave really good effects. But I would focus on a lot of artifacts. I think the bulk of my deck would be colorless. So it would be artifacts, creatures, and then a lot of good equipments, but also just cheap equipments, because as long as it's equipped in any fashion, it has flying and haste. So even just like low drops that just give a buff of like +1/+0 or +1/+1, you don't need, Loxodon Warhammers and stuff like that, because all you need is to get the creatures equipped, and now they're flying. And if you have other creatures that are giving the static buff, like I said, now you've got 3/3s, 4/4s in the air hopefully you can, sail over your opponents and smack them. Also, I would try and focus with the red and the blue, the colors, for your card draw and your destruction spells to try and buy you time, like targeted removals and counter spells or something like that. That's generally how I would probably go about building Dalekos. But what about you? How would you focus the deck? I assume you probably wouldn't go artifact creatures, just like really good equips, and what kind of creatures? How would you build it? Next up, we've got Balamor, Battle Mage Captain. Now he's a 2-drop, which is even better, also red-blue. He's a 1/3 flyer, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until the end of turn. Now, red and blue are actually two of my weakest colors, so both of these first two decks would be a good experiment in branching out past what I'm used to and good at. Not that I'm good at any of them, obviously, but you get what I'm saying. Those are my worst ones. Now, he's only a 1/3, but again, flyer, and I'm still trying to get into the whole instants and sorceries and, all those cards that say copy instants and sorceries, and when you copy, do this. That feels like a good idea for this deck, but obviously it needs to be very instant and sorcery heavy, but you need a lot of creatures. So I'm thinking like what? Possibly, I don't know. What do you think? Like maybe some sort of token generators, and then like low drop creatures, and then maybe 1 or 2 bomb creatures, like they're really big and really good effects, but mostly just like 1, 2, 3 mana value creatures that get out on the field, and then a bunch of buff spells or a bunch of targeted, instants and sorceries that blast your opponent in the face with the red, or, something that in the blue that'll bounce your opponents, like Cyclonic Rift or something. So it's like, okay, cool, now all my little creatures are getting +1/+0, and they have trample, swing in. But maybe that's the bad idea. Maybe tokens, because tokens tend to come in small. So now you're looking at a 2/1. Even if you have like 10 of them, that's good, but how easy is it to get 10 of them out like that? So perhaps it needs to be something else. And maybe it'd be fun to focus on the flying, even though it would give them trample. But what about a ton of blue-red flyers that come in, relatively decent, like 2/2s, 2/3, 3/3s, whatever. Then, you play a bunch of the buff spells and give them the effect. And again, with blue, I would try and do the card draw, Ristic Study if I could afford it, those kind of cards at least, to get the card generation, because you're always going to need those buff spells, those instants and sorceries, to get the effect of the legendary creature. Otherwise, it's, if you dump your hand and have no way to fill it quickly, other than just your 1 draw per turn, you're going to stall out real quick on this kind of a commander, and I've learned that the hard way. So how would you go about it? What would be your tactics to build something like this? And then finally, we've got Jadzi, Oracle of Arcaveus. Now, this is the really interesting one, and it would be very tough for me because it's outside my wheelhouse. Not only is it a 7-drop, which is horrible for me, like my Toxtrol, like that's just too high. You need to ramp crazy good, and it's blue, so you don't have ramp spells. So you have to ramp with like artifacts really well. He's a 5/5. You can discard a card to return it to your hand. So that's cool if someone tries to blow it up or bounce, bouncing it wouldn't hurt you, but trying to blow it up or board wipe, I just discard an extra land and I can keep them from getting, an extra 2 mana to play them. But the real thing is the Magecraft. This sounds really great. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield. Now, I can definitely see why that's a 8-drop, because that sounds really great. Anytime you play a little tiny 1-cost blue spell, it's instant or sorcery, boom, you reveal the top card of your library, and all you get, it's this crazy giant creature, a Leviathan. I'm just going to pay 1 and play this, 7-drop Leviathan. But of course, to get your deck lined up that way, maybe you want to focus on some cards that let you scry and organize the top of your library, right? Maybe some Sensei's Divining Top, I guess. You're going to need a lot of, Aetherize and type stuff to buy you the time just to get this character out. So what are you going to have in the meantime? You're going to want creatures, to do stuff, but, what kind of creatures would you put in that kind of deck? Because a 7-drop, it's going to be, unless you ramp perfectly and you really luck out, maybe turn 4. I mean, I know the real players could do it like, oh, I can get him out on turn 2. But you're looking at turn 4, probably turn 5 if you hit the right, soul ring into like a Thran Dynamo into something else, within the first couple turns. Like I do with Toxtril if I'm super, super, super lucky. But what would you do? Or would you kind of like not build around his real ability as a main focus and build something else and just have that as a secondary? Like, hey, if I get him out, then I can start doing this extra aspect of it. Would that be something? Maybe focus on a different creature tactic with him and then hope that you get him out relatively quick and can start getting the bonus effect out of it. So there you go. Those are 3 commanders that are new to me, as it were. Definitely outside of my normal play styles. Would be an interesting experiment to build. And those are my thoughts. That's how I see the decks. When I come to build a legendary creature, that's a real quick overview of how I would go about starting those kind of decks and seeing what I had card-wise. How would you build them? Where would you take these decks? And what kind of creatures, cards, spells, what would you put in? Let me know in the comments. And I'll see you next time on the Unskilled Commander Possibilities.